The feds are actively working with third-party organizations to register criminals to vote, even though it's illegal. This isn't taking place in a swing state. This isn't taking place in a blue state. This is taking place in blood red Alabama.
I suspect Alabama will soon become a fond memory.
Let's get into it. Welcome back to Underreported Stories, where I cover the news that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News fail to report on or don't report on enough. So I saw a couple of reports from the Federalist that made me want to dig into this idea that maybe our elections aren't as secure as they proclaim to be. The conservatives on this channel might be thinking, well, duh, Chrissy, look at what we saw in 2020. And I want to make this clear. This video is not about rehashing prior political acts. This is about election integrity in 2024 and providing you with the facts to make up your own mind. So without further ado, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Should we call them Big Prison? I like that. BP, Big Prison. Okay, we're going to go with that, okay? Big Prison, at the request of Joe Biden, has been registering federal prisoners to vote in the state of Alabama, according to a new report from the Federalist. Okay, like I said, the Federalist doing this reporting, it says, we're going to call them Big Prison. Big Prison has been registering federal prisoners to vote in Alabama, according to the state's Secretary of State. At least one third-party organization has been deployed by the Federal Bureau of Prisons to conduct voter registration in federal prisons in Alabama. Obviously, this is a cause for concern. So, according to the Secretary of State, and then obviously confirmed through my investigations, President Joe Biden has an executive order called Executive Order on Promoting Access to Voting. This was issued back in March of 2021, and its goal was to, quote, mobilize and weaponize the entire federal government to register primarily Democratic-leaning groups of voters. Now, that is not what the executive order did not say, like primarily Democrat. It's just to register voters. So the program has taken the name Biden Bucks, similar to Zuck Bucks, which is a playoff of Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg. And this enabled third-party election, I wouldn't say meddling, but third-party election interference, we'll say. I don't like the word meddling. It sounds more nefarious than I actually intend for this to sound, because we are trying to just give you the facts. So we'll call it interference. And these are just get out the vote efforts in general. So according to this report, the Secretary of State asked the White House this year how the federal government had implemented this in Alabama, given the fact that Alabama requires voters to be citizens and not convicted of a disqualifying felony. So in Alabama, you cannot commit a crime of, quote, moral turpitude and then have voting privileges. You can't be a convicted felon, in short, and have the ability to vote in Alabama. And that's not the only state that does that. We'll get into it. But all in all, I think it's just interesting how the federal government is utilizing, again, third-party organizations, traditionally very liberal third-party organizations, to push out a get-to-vote effort. And in this article, I will say this is opinion, not fact. I guess the Secretary of State, as well as this journalist at the Federalist, believes that this has become an effort to work with liberals specifically because liberals are more likely to get jailed or something along those lines. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, but really the argument is people are voting Democrat because Democrats are in favor of maybe more lenient sentences in the prison system. Very interesting. The article kind of gets into that. I will say that is opinion. I don't know if there's entirely a whole database of information to back that up. And of course, it's interesting to learn the ins and outs of how the federal government is assisting Big Prison, as we'll call it, to register people to vote. But the truth of the matter is that this is illegal in many states, including Alabama, to register convicted felons to vote or to allow convicted felons to vote. I found a graph on procon.org that shows voting rights for people in prison state by state. Looking at this graph here, you can see states like Arizona, Wyoming, Iowa, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And I believe that's Delaware right there. If you are convicted of a felony, you may lose your right to vote permanently. And in other states like Texas, South Dakota, Nebraska, Arkansas, Georgia, Alaska, etc., your right to vote gets restored after prison, parole, and probation. Then there are other states where these are seemingly some of the more liberal states. as well as some of the swing states. So look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada, etc. These are places where your vote is restored after you've gone to prison. And only in Vermont, DC, and Maryland are you just unrestricted prisoners can vote. But you have to understand this is a nationwide issue, right? The federal government is pushing this register to vote program on federal prisons across the country. And you saw that map. While not all of them believe that you have to lose your vote permanently, most of them don't allow you to vote in that state until you've gotten out of prison, except for Vermont, Maine, and DC. So the effort strikes me as slightly sketchy, as it's fact that the federal government cannot come in, it cannot overtake the state's election system by registering criminals to vote in states where many convicted felons permanently lose their right to vote. And it would be one thing if the federal government was assisting the states in their voter registration efforts, but it appears that in our example case here in Alabama, the federal government will help register convicted felons, they'll help register illegal immigrants to vote, but then when the state asks for assistance in cleaning up the voter registration, the feds ghost them.
Ghosted completely.
Alabama recently uncovered more than 3,000 potential non-citizens registered to vote in the state, and despite pleading for federal assistance, the feds went silent. Another report from Logan Washburn over at The Federalist. Shout out to this guy. He's doing great investigative reporting. And this story talks about how more than 3,000 potential non-citizens were registered to vote in the state. Again, this is coming from the Secretary of State, Wes Allen. They found a total of 3,251 registered voters with non-citizen ID numbers issued by the Department of Homeland Security. The office in Alabama is telling local administrators to inactivate and initiate steps necessary to remove all those people who are not U.S. citizens from the voter file. So illegal immigrants or people who are non-citizens, they're not allowed to vote. They are no longer allowed to have the ability to vote. They were never allowed to have that ability in the first place, but somehow these non-citizens got registered to vote. So what comes after this is that the state now has to inactivate all of these non-citizen ID numbers, and that includes the non-citizen ID numbers of individuals who might have become citizens by now. And that's just because this federal government won't do anything to assist them. So if we saw a non-citizen ID number on there and the federal government was able to say, hey, this person is a naturalized citizen now, the state wouldn't be taking these people off the voter registration for obvious reasons. But the state is now going to inactivate these registrations, and anybody who has become a citizen since will now have to update their registration when they get their driver's license, or they can use some sort of ID or a social security number. But the problem lies in the way that the federal government just repeatedly denies requests to help with this investigation. It says, according to this report, that the state's Secretary of State has been contacting the Department of Homeland Security and their Citizen and Immigration Services Division since November of 2023, requesting a list of non-citizens living in Alabama to cross-reference with the state voter file. This isn't to get the non-citizens, okay? Non-citizens just means like illegal aliens or legal aliens. It could be either. Most likely it's legal citizens, people like myself that came over from, I'm from Canada. We come over and we're citizens. We're allowed to be here, but we're not allowed to vote. That's a thing. I don't know why people get so up in arms in this. We never voted. My family did not vote. When I was 18, I voted for the first time alongside my father, who had lived in the country for 15 years. So anyway, that is all of this to say the federal government has been denying requests to help with these voter registration rolls. So not only do the feds seemingly assist in illegal activity, they don't help in cleaning up the mess they made. And this leads to voters feeling probably anxious at the state of our election integrity and security. And then add to this the problems that come with voting via mail. And I hear the criticism, we've always had mail-in voting. I understand I voted via mail in college, but in 2020, factually, we expanded as a country access to mail-in voting for non-extenuating circumstances. And moving into 2024, it appears our postal services are not up to the task of having this many mail-in ballots. A new audit released by the U.S. Postal Service's Inspector General found that a majority of postal facilities audited in our 2024 primary failed to follow the election mail procedures. So the Office of the Inspector General at the USPS, so our postal service in the US, conducted an audit, evaluation, research, and investigation into figuring out the efficiency, accountability, and integrity of the USPS during elections. This was commissioned back in November of 2023, and it was a self-initiated audit of the 2024 general election. So what they did was they took 15 mail processing facilities and 35 delivery units located in 13 states as well as Puerto Rico during the primary elections of this past year, so February and March of this year. And they did an audit to see how prepared the USPS was for a general election, as very obviously the primary elections are just less robust in terms of the number of people that actually go out and vote. So the first finding of concern was this lack of compliance with election mail and political mail policies. So basically, when an employee gets a piece of like a vote, we'll call it a ballot, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to log it. And there's an entire handbook that provides employees with all of the resources for understanding the long-standing special handling procedures required to facilitate not just a timely process, but even the delivery of mail. And so, according to the report, over half of the delivery units and processing facilities that the OIG, the Inspector General's office, visited were not properly completing the all-clear certifications or maintaining the election and political mail logs. The audit found that personnel at processing facilities did not complete the daily audit checklist as required by policy, and some people inaccurately marked items as completed even though they never did this. These findings could, hypothetically, negatively affect USPS services, and they are indicative of a lack of understanding and training with respect to election and political mail policy and procedures. The report says, without full compliance, implementation, and a clear understanding of the election and political mail policies, there is a risk of improper handling, untimely processing, and late delivery of election and political mail. The second part that was considered concerning is the operational risks to a timely processing. So I believe in the last two elections, it's been very clear that we haven't gotten results in the same timely manner. And part of that is due to the fact that we have had an increase in mail-in ballots. So the second audit detailed how operational risks could delay the process of the election. And the audit revealed inconsistent election day coordination, as well as a lack of processes to segregate election mail and confusion about postmarking. So again, I would really encourage you to read this report. It is linked below, but long story short, in 8 of the 14 facilities observed this year on primary election day, 1 out of every 82 ballots did not make it to the election office on time to be counted. There were various contributing elements, including mail processing facilities that didn't have any processes to separate out ballots from other mail, and also delivery units didn't coordinate with other processing centers to get the ballots out. And there was even one case in which ballots from one county were being shipped to another county. It just wasn't adding up. So add this story to the Fed's seeming lack of care about genuine election integrity, and you'll get the picture that election integrity in America is not up to snuff. But if you only listen to mainstream news outlets, you get the vibe that election interference and integrity is not a big deal. It's just like a hoax created by Republicans. And I'm not a Republican, so I can say this. Republicans do themselves no favors when they take limited and non-preemptive action to rectify alleged election interference. If you know it's going to happen, then why are you waiting for the election to take place? Start filing lawsuits before the election if you see illegal activity. Do what Alabama's doing. What Alabama is doing to go through their voter roll to ensure election integrity, that should be the gold standard for elections nationwide. Unfortunately, in all honesty, it's not going to take referendums in red states like Alabama to nullify election integrity concerns. We need this kind of behavior to take place in Georgia, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in the swing states. Those states should feel the pressure to engage in similar audits and ensure that their election procedures are up to snuff. I hear the criticism, by the way, and I agree. that there isn't data right now to support widespread voter fraud. That's true. There's no data. But what I've never understood from the criticism, specifically from far leftists, is this idea that we should just write off election integrity questions as a hoax because America's perfect. Leftists literally spend all their time talking about how awful America is, except for our amazing election process, I guess. The truth is, we can always be doing more to ensure that our elections are of the highest quality. What is the worst thing that could happen? The election is more secure? Ooh, scary.
I'm so scared.
But beyond the politics of this election integrity question, I think there's also a culture brewing on social media, and it's the culture of vote no matter what. It's mostly propagated by young radical leftists who don't just believe it's an honor to vote. They believe you're a voter suppressor if you're apathetic about people's personal responsibility to vote. And calling people names can be effective, especially to the deep state weenies who spend way too much time online. So I believe the result of a loud campaign to push people to vote is registering everyone to vote, even if those people have no intention to engage in the political system. And then we get third-party operations whose sole goal is to get anyone to register to vote, legal or not. But what that ideology has proven to us is that there are dire consequences to our election integrity and our cohesiveness as a nation when we act this way. Because not that long ago, we were in somewhat agreement about the results of elections. And then this cultural wave of everybody must vote no matter what became a thing. Maybe there's a little correlation. But let me know your thoughts on this research in the comments below. If you're a real story seeker and true member of this online community, please drop the mailbox emoji in the comments, and I'll see you here next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment about how beautiful, stunning, and funny I am. And if you want more content based in logic, be sure to click over here for more videos and clips of my show. If you have the means to financially support the show, consider purchasing from my merch line, Based Apparel, linked right below. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye, friends.